I was 26 years old when I woke up from a 6-month coma to discover that my father had erased me from his life. Not quietly, not with any dignity. He'd walked into the law offices of Patterson and Klein in downtown Boston while I was still fighting for my life in Massachusetts General Hospital and told them to remove my name from his will. "Michael is no longer my son," he'd said, according to the paralegal who later felt guilty enough to tell me the truth. "He's a burden I can no longer afford to carry." Those were his exact words, a burden. That's what Richard Donovan called his only son, while that son lay unconscious with a traumatic brain injury, fighting for every breath. 5 years later, I sat in my corner office on the 42nd floor of the Hancock Tower, overlooking the same city where my father had abandoned me, running a software company worth $25 million. And on a cold Tuesday morning in November, my assistant buzzed through on the intercom. "Mr. Donovan, there's a Richard Donovan here to see you. He says he's your father. He doesn't have an appointment, but he's insisting it's urgent." I stared at the intercom for a long moment, my hand hovering over the button. I hadn't seen or spoken to Richard in 5 years. Not since the day I'd walked out of that hospital, still learning to walk properly again, and found out what he'd done. "Send him in," I said finally. Because I'd been waiting for this moment. I'd been building toward it for 5 years. Let me take you back to the beginning, because you need to understand who Richard Donovan is and why he did what he did. My father built Donovan Construction from nothing, a small contracting business in South Boston that he grew into one of the most successful commercial development companies in New England. By the time I was in high school, he was worth somewhere around $40 million, with projects all over Massachusetts and Rhode Island. We lived in a mansion in Brookline, had a summer house on the Cape, drove expensive cars. My mother, Elizabeth, had died when I was 12, breast cancer, so it was just my father, my older brother James, and me. James was the golden child, 4 years older than me. He was everything my father wanted in a son. He went to Harvard Business School, joined the company right after graduation, worked 70-hour weeks, talked about profit margins and ROI at dinner. I was different. I went to MIT but studied computer science instead of business. I wanted to build software, create technology, solve problems with code instead of concrete. My father hated it. "You're wasting your education," he'd tell me at least once a week. "There's no real money in computers. Construction built this family. Construction will sustain it." We fought about it constantly. By the time I graduated in 2018 at 24 years old, we barely spoke unless we had to. I started working at a small tech startup in Cambridge called Data Stream Solutions. The pay was terrible, $55,000 a year, but I loved the work. We were building predictive analytics software for supply chain management. I'd work until midnight most nights, teaching myself new programming languages, contributing to open source projects on weekends. My father saw it as proof that I'd made the wrong choice. "James made 6 figures his first year out of school," he'd remind me. "You're making what, 50, and living in that shoebox apartment in Somerville?" He was right about the apartment. It was tiny, 4th floor walk-up, radiator that barely worked. But it was mine. I was building something. I was independent. Then came March 15th in 2019. I was riding my motorcycle home from work around 10 p.m., a used Yamaha I'd bought with my signing bonus, when a drunk driver in an F-150 ran a red light at the intersection of Mass Ave and Memorial Drive. I don't remember the impact. I don't remember the ambulance or the emergency surgery or the first 3 weeks in the ICU. What I do remember is waking up in a hospital room 63 days later, confused and disoriented, with a nurse named Patricia holding my hand and crying. "Welcome back, Michael," she said. "You scared us there for a while." My skull had been fractured in 3 places. I'd had bleeding in my brain. The doctors had induced a coma to reduce the swelling, and when they'd tried to bring me out of it after 2 weeks, I hadn't woken up, so they'd waited and waited. And somewhere around day 55, I'd finally started showing signs of consciousness. My father had visited exactly 3 times during those 63 days. 3 times in 9 weeks. Patricia told me this later, during one of our conversations when she thought I was strong enough to hear it. Your brother came every day for the first 2 weeks, she said. Then it dropped to twice a week. Your father. He came the day of the accident, once about 3 weeks in, and once more around day 45. That last time, he stood at the foot of your bed for maybe 5 minutes. Didn't say anything, just stared at you. Then he left. She paused, uncomfortable. Michael, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but I heard him talking to the doctor in the hallway. He was asking about long-term care facilities, about what happens when families can't afford to keep someone on life support indefinitely. I felt cold when she said that. What did the doctor say? I asked. Patricia looked at her hands. Dr. Morrison told him that you were stable, that there was still brain activity, that giving up wasn't an option yet. Your father said something about financial realities and difficult decisions. Then he left. That was the last time we saw him. That conversation happened on day 72 of my hospital stay. By day 80, I was doing physical therapy, relearning how to walk without assistance. By day 90, I was strong enough to have visitors outside of family. My friend Alex from DataStream came to see me, and that's when I learned what had really happened while I was unconscious. Dude, I don't know how to tell you this, Alex said, sitting in the uncomfortable hospital chair beside my bed. But your father, he's been telling people you're probably not going to make it, that the doctors say you'll be a vegetable even if you wake up. I stared at him. What? Alex ran his hand through his hair, clearly uncomfortable. James showed up at the office about 2 months ago, said he was there to collect your personal items, said the family was making arrangements. Everyone assumed you died, man. We were about to hold a memorial service. I felt like I'd been punched. I'm alive. I'm sitting right here. I know, Alex said, but your father's been basically writing you off. He told our CEO that the family wouldn't be pursuing any lawsuit against the drunk driver because it would be too emotionally taxing. Mike, the guy who hit you had 3 prior DUIs. The settlement could have been massive. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. That's when I started making phone calls. It took me 2 weeks to get in touch with Sarah Chen, the paralegal at Patterson and Klein, who'd been present when my father had changed his will. She didn't want to talk to me at first, attorney-client privilege and all that. But when I told her I was alive and awake and wanted to know what had happened, she broke. I'm so sorry, she said over the phone, her voice shaking. I told Mr. Patterson this was wrong. I told him we should wait, but your father was insistent. She told me everything. On April 30th of 2019, 6 weeks into my coma, Richard Donovan had walked into that law office with James and demanded an emergency amendment to his will. The previous version had split everything 50-50 between James and me. The new version gave James 95% of everything. The company, the properties, the investment accounts. I got 5%, specifically designated for long-term medical care if necessary. He said you'd never work again, Sarah told me. That even if you woke up, you'd be severely disabled. He said it wouldn't be fair to leave you a company you couldn't run or money you couldn't manage. He was setting up a trust for your care, he said, being responsible. I felt rage unlike anything I'd ever experienced. And James? What did my brother say? There was a long pause. Your brother signed as a witness, Sarah said quietly. He didn't argue. He didn't question it. He just signed. That phone call happened on day 105 of my hospital stay. By day 120, I was discharged. I could walk, talk, think clearly. The doctors called it a miracle. I called it fuel. I went back to my apartment in Somerville to find that James had packed up most of my stuff and put it in storage. There was a note on the kitchen counter. Mike, if you're reading this, I'm glad you made it. Call me when you're ready. We need to talk about your future. Jay, I never called him. Instead, I called my landlord and renewed my lease. I called DataStream and discovered they'd hired someone to replace me. I called the insurance company handling the accident case and discovered that my father had indeed declined to pursue a lawsuit, even though the drunk driver had $50,000 in assets and his insurance would have covered up to $1 million. My father had left $1 million on the table because pursuing it would have required him to acknowledge that I might survive and deserve compensation. I spent a month just recovering, physically and mentally. I did physical therapy. I saw a therapist for the PTSD. I avoided all contact with my father and James. And I started coding again. Late at night, sitting at my laptop in that tiny apartment, I began building something. The idea had come to me in the hospital, during all those hours of physical therapy when I'd watched the nurses struggling with outdated software to manage patient schedules and medication tracking. I started building a healthcare management platform, something intuitive, cloud-based, that could integrate with existing hospital systems but make everything smoother. I called it MediFlow. I worked on it obsessively. 16-hour days. I taught myself new frameworks, studied healthcare compliance regulations, reached out to nurses and hospital administrators for feedback. By month 3, I had a working prototype. By month 6, I'd pitched it to 3 hospitals and gotten 2 pilot programs. By month 9, I'd incorporated as MediFlow Systems, Inc. and raised $750,000 in seed funding from a small venture capital firm in Cambridge. The investor who'd believed in me was a woman named Rachel Torres, 45 years old, who'd made her money in early biotech investments. "You're scrappy," she'd told me after my pitch, "and you've got skin in the game. You almost died in a hospital. You know what they need. I'm in." That seed money changed everything. I hired 2 developers, a UX designer, and a salesperson. We worked out of a WeWork in Kendall Square. By the end of year 2, we had contracts with 15 hospitals across New England. By year 3, we'd expanded to New York and New Jersey, raised a Series A round of $8 million, and moved into real office space. I barely slept. I barely ate. I poured everything into MediFlow because it was proof. Proof that I wasn't a burden. Proof that I could build something valuable. Proof that Richard Donovan had been catastrophically wrong about me. I never reached out to him. I never sent him updates. I let him believe whatever he wanted to believe. By year 4, MediFlow was doing $12 million in annual revenue. We had 80 employees and contracts with over 50 healthcare facilities. Tech blogs were writing about us. Healthcare industry journals were featuring our case studies. And I started hearing through mutual acquaintances that Richard had heard about my company, that he'd mentioned it to someone at a charity gala, that he'd said something like, "That's my son's company," with what was described as pride. I felt nothing when I heard that. No satisfaction, no anger, nothing. Because he'd had 4 years to reach out, 4 years to apologize, 4 years to acknowledge what he'd done, and he'd stayed silent. Year 5 was when everything came together. We closed a Series B round of $18 million, bringing our company valuation to $25 million. We signed a major contract with a hospital network in California. Forbes did a feature on me. 30 under 30 in healthcare technology. The article mentioned that I'd built the company after recovering from a near-fatal motorcycle accident that left me in a coma for 6 months. It mentioned that I'd grown up in Boston. It didn't mention my father or Donovan Construction. I'd specifically asked the journalist to leave that out. This wasn't about him. This was about me. The article ran in October 2024. 6 weeks later, my father showed up at my office. I watched him walk through my glass door, and for the first time in 5 years, I really looked at him. Richard Donovan was 62 years old now, but he looked older. His hair had gone completely gray. He'd lost weight. He was wearing an expensive suit, but it hung loose on him in a way that suggested he'd lost the weight recently and hadn't had time to get the suit tailored. His face was drawn, tired. He looked like a man carrying something heavy. "Hello, Michael," he said, standing in front of my desk. His voice was the same, deep, authoritative. But there was something else underneath it now. Something that sounded like uncertainty. "Richard," I said. I didn't stand up. I didn't offer him a seat. I just looked at him. He flinched at the use of his first name. "I suppose I deserve that," he said. "May I sit?" I gestured to the chair across from my desk. He sat down slowly, looking around the office, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the view of Boston Harbor, the framed Forbes article on the wall behind me. "You've done well for yourself," he said. "Very well." "Thank you," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "What can I do for you?" He took a breath. "I need your help, Michael. The company is in trouble. Serious trouble." I waited. I didn't react. I just waited for him to continue. "We took on some development projects that went sideways," he said. "A mixed-use complex in Providence that the city pulled permits on halfway through construction. A commercial property in Worcester where the anchor tenant declared bankruptcy before the building was finished. We're over-leveraged. The bank is calling in loans. We're about to default on $15 million in debt." He looked at me with something that might have been desperation. "James has been trying to hold it together, but he's in over his head. We need capital. We need $8 million to restructure the debt and finish the Providence project. If we can finish it, we can sell it, clear the debt, and stabilize." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Richard leaned forward. "Because you have access to capital. You just raised $18 million. And because—" He stopped, seemed to struggle with the words. "Because you're my son. Because I'm asking for your help." The silence that followed was thick. Outside my office, I could hear the normal sounds of the workday, keyboards clicking, people talking, a phone ringing. Inside this room, there was just the weight of 5 years of abandonment sitting between us. "You want me to give you $8 million, I said slowly. "That's correct. To save the company that you didn't think I was worthy of inheriting." His face went pale. "Michael, the company that you gave 95% of to James while I was in a coma, while I was fighting for my life." "I made a mistake," Richard said, his voice rough. "I was scared. The doctors said you might never wake up, and if you did, you might never be the same. I was trying to be practical, trying to protect—" "Protect what?" I interrupted. "Your money? Your legacy? Certainly not me." I stood up and walked to the window, my back to him. "Do you know what the nurses told me, Richard? They told me you visited me 3 times in 63 days. 3 times. James came every day at first, then twice a week. But you came 3 times. And the 3rd time, you asked the doctor about pulling the plug. That's not—" "I never said—" Richard started. I turned to face him. "You asked about financial realities, about long-term care facilities, about what happens when families can't afford to keep someone on life support. Those were your words." He closed his eyes. "I was confused, overwhelmed. I didn't know what to do." "You knew enough to go to your lawyer and write me out of your will 6 weeks into my coma," I said. "You knew enough to tell people I was probably going to be a vegetable. You knew enough to decline the lawsuit that could have compensated me for my medical bills and lost income. You chose, Richard. You chose to give up on me because it was easier than believing I might come back." The silence stretched out again. Richard looked at his hands. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "You're right. About all of it. I failed you. I was a coward. And I've regretted it every day for 5 years." He looked up at me, and I saw tears in his eyes. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I don't deserve your help. But I'm asking anyway because I'm desperate, and because you're the only person who can save what I've spent 40 years building. Please, Michael, please help me." I walked back to my desk and sat down. I opened my laptop and pulled up a document I'd had my lawyer draft 2 weeks ago. I'd known this was coming. The business journals had been reporting on Donovan Construction's struggles. I'd known he'd eventually come to me. I'd been prepared. "I'll help you," I said. Richard's face flooded with relief. Thank you, Michael. I promise I'll pay you back." "I'm not finished," I said. I turned the laptop around so he could see the screen. This is a term sheet for an $8 million investment in Donovan Construction. It includes debt restructuring, operational oversight, and an equity stake. Richard leaned forward to read it. I watched his face change as he scrolled through the document. This says you'd own 55% of the company. That's correct. Michael, that's controlling interest. That means I'd be the majority owner. That means you and James would work for me. That means every major decision goes through me. That means I own the company that you said I'd never be worthy of touching. I leaned back in my chair. Those are my terms. Take it or lose everything. He stared at the screen for a long time. I could see him processing it, see the wheels turning, see him calculating whether there was any other option. Finally, he looked at me. This is revenge. No, I said. Revenge would be watching you lose everything and enjoying it. This is business. You need capital. I have capital. These are my terms. If you don't like them, there's the door. I'm sure you can find another investor willing to bail out a failing construction company with $15 million in bad debt. I paused. Oh, wait. You can't. Because you've been trying for months and no one will touch you. That's why you're here. Richard's jaw clenched. I could see the war happening inside him, his pride fighting against his desperation. If I sign this, I lose everything I built. No, I said. If you sign this, you save what you built. You just won't own most of it anymore. You'll have a job. You'll have a salary. You'll get to keep working, but the company will be mine. I leaned forward. Do you remember what you called me while I was in that coma? You called me a burden. You said I wasn't worth the investment. Well, here's my investment terms for you. 55% of your company in exchange for saving it. That's the price of this burden helping you. The silence that followed was the longest yet. Richard sat there, staring at the screen, his hands gripping the armrests of the chair so hard his knuckles were white. I could see him aging before my eyes, see the weight of this decision crushing him. And I felt nothing. No satisfaction. No guilt. Nothing. Because this was justice. This was the natural consequence of his choices. I need to think about it, he said finally. You have 24 hours, I said. After that, the offer expires. And Richard, don't come back here trying to negotiate. This isn't a negotiation. It's a yes or no question. He stood up slowly, like an old man. Michael, I know you hate me. I know you have every right to. But I want you to know that I'm proud of what you've built. I was wrong about you. About everything. I didn't respond. He walked to the door, then turned back. What happened to you? The kind, smart kid I used to read bedtime stories to. Where did he go? I met his eyes. He woke up from a coma to find out his father had abandoned him. He died in that hospital room. I'm what's left. Richard left without another word. I sat at my desk for a long time after he was gone, staring out at the Boston skyline. My assistant knocked quietly. Mr. Donovan, your 3 o'clock is here. Give me 5 minutes, I said. I pulled out my phone and looked at a photo I kept in a locked folder. It was from my MIT graduation. My mother had been dead for 6 years by then, but Richard had come to the ceremony. In the photo, he had his arm around my shoulders, and we were both smiling. I looked at that photo for a long time. Then I deleted it, because that man was gone, and so was that version of me. 24 hours later, Richard Donovan signed the term sheet. He transferred 55% ownership of Donovan Construction to Mediflow Holdings, LLC, a subsidiary I'd created specifically for this acquisition. James called me 3 times that day. I didn't answer. He sent emails. I didn't respond. Finally, he showed up at my office without an appointment, and my assistant let him through because she knew he was my brother. You're destroying him, James said, standing in my doorway. You're humiliating our father. 55%. Really? Mike, you couldn't just loan him the money? I looked at my brother, 35 years old now, wearing a suit that probably cost $3,000, looking at me with a mixture of anger and something that might have been guilt. Did you ever visit me, James? After those first 2 weeks? He blinked. What? In the hospital. Did you keep visiting me after the first 2 weeks? He shifted uncomfortably. I came when I could. The company was falling apart. Dad needed me. Did you argue when he changed the will? I interrupted. Did you tell him it was wrong? Did you say, "Hey, Dad, maybe we should wait to see if Mike wakes up before we write him out of the family"? James looked at the floor. It was complicated. The doctors said, "I don't care what the doctors said. I care what you did. You signed that document as a witness. You helped him erase me." I stood up. You want to talk about humiliation? Try waking up from a coma to find out your entire family gave up on you. Try finding out your father declined $1 million settlement because it would have required him to acknowledge you might recover. Try building everything from nothing while your family told people you were probably brain damaged. I walked toward him. I didn't destroy Dad. He destroyed himself. I'm just the one who gets to pick up the pieces. James left without arguing further. Over the next 3 months, I restructured Donovan Construction completely. I brought in new management, renegotiated contracts, and personally oversaw the completion of the Providence project. We sold it for $22 million, cleared all the debt, and stabilized the company. Richard and James kept their positions, but they reported to a COO I appointed. They got salaries. They got to keep working. But the Donovan family no longer controlled Donovan Construction. I did. I never moved into my father's old office. I kept running Mediflow from the Hancock Tower and managed Donovan Construction remotely. I didn't need to sit in that office to own the company. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. The business community in Boston talked about it for months. The son who'd come back from a coma to take over his father's company. Forbes did a follow-up article. Business Insider called it the most dramatic corporate takeover in New England business history. My father never spoke to me again outside of necessary business communications. James tried a few times to bridge the gap, but I wasn't interested. 3 years later, Mediflow was acquired by a major healthcare technology company for $85 million, and my stake was worth $38 million after taxes. I sold Donovan Construction to a national developer for $45 million. After paying off all remaining obligations and distributing shares to employees, I personally netted another $18 million. At 32 years old, I was worth just over $50 million. I bought a house in Beacon Hill. I started a venture capital firm focused on healthcare technology. I funded scholarships for traumatic brain injury survivors. I built the life I wanted, and I never spoke to Richard Donovan again. He died 2 years later, heart attack, sudden, at 67 years old. James called to tell me. I thanked him for letting me know and hung up. I didn't go to the funeral. I didn't send flowers. I didn't issue a statement. Because the man who'd been my father had died years before in the hallway of Massachusetts General Hospital when he'd asked a doctor about pulling the plug on his own son. Some people say I'm cold, that I should have forgiven him, that family is family, no matter what. But those people didn't wake up from a coma to find out they'd been erased. Those people didn't have to rebuild their entire life from a hospital bed while their family divided up their inheritance. Those people didn't have to prove every single day that they were worth something, that they weren't a burden, that they deserved to exist. I did, and I won. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I refused to be what Richard Donovan said I was. I refused to be a burden. I refused to disappear. I built something real, something valuable, something that helped people. And in the process, I proved that the biggest mistake my father ever made wasn't changing his will. It was underestimating what I could become without him. That's the truth about family betrayal. It doesn't destroy you. It clarifies you. It shows you exactly who people are when things get hard. and it gives you a choice. Lie down and accept their version of you, or stand up and prove them wrong. I chose to stand, and I've never looked back.